Hello and welcome back to my channel. This was my Philodendron Heartleaf just 1 month ago, lush, green and thriving. And this is the same plant now. It looks awful, I know, I made a lot of mistakes and now I'm doing my best to save it. I'll tell you exactly what happened and walk you through the 5 mistakes that led to this and that you should avoid. Even though this plant is known for being easygoing and tough to damage, a few simple mistakes can slowly turn your lush trailing beauty into something like this. I've had this plant for around 6 years. For the past 5 years it stayed in the same spot and was doing amazing. But about a month ago I noticed one of the vines getting soft. The leaves started wilting and drying out. And to be honest, I was too busy, didn't react fast enough, and now the entire plant is suffering. Philodendron Heartleaf is a stunning plant with its delicate heart-shaped leaves. It's a medium grower and very easy to care for, which is why so many plant lovers adore it. But if you are not careful, these common mistakes can cost you your plant. My biggest mistake was underwatering. I let the soil dry out way too much. It was winter and I didn't want to water it too often because of the plant's resting period. But what I didn't take into account was that the soil was already very old and I simply wasn't paying enough attention. The leaves started curling, turning yellow and eventually drying up. And by the time I realized what was happening, the damage was already done. But it's not just underwatering that can harm your plant. Overwatering is just as dangerous. It can lead to root rot, soft mushy stems and sudden leaf loss. Even inconsistent watering can confuse the plant and put it under stress. Philodendron Heartleaf needs balance. Yes, they like their soil to dry out a bit between waterings, but letting it get too dry, especially in old or compacted soil, can be harmful. So I suggest always checking the soil first, either with your finger or a moisture meter. If the top half is dry, go ahead and water thoroughly, but make sure to pour off any excess water from the tray after 15 minutes. And always use pots with drainage holes to avoid root rot. Too dry for too long, the plant suffers. Too wet, the roots drown. Philodendron Heartleaf doesn't need frequent repotting and it actually grows better in slightly smaller pots. But just because the plant doesn't need a bigger pot doesn't mean it shouldn't be repotted. And here is why. Over time, even if the roots aren't filling up the pot, the soil starts breaking down. It becomes compacted, loses nutrients and can't hold moisture properly or provide enough oxygen to the roots. And that's exactly what happened to mine. I kept it in the same pot for years, literally years, because it looked fine and I just ignored it. But underneath, the roots were struggling in old, depleted soil. The soil was already too dry and lifeless when I finally started watering more often. Repotting isn't always about giving your plant a bigger pot. Sometimes it's just about refreshing the soil, giving it a healthy, breathable mix to grow in. So if your philodendron has been sitting in the same pot for more than 2 to 3 years, take a moment to check the soil. And even if you don't want to fully repot it, at least remove the top layer and add some fresh soil. I recommend using a well-draining mix made for aeroids, something light and airy, not heavy or compact. Your plant's roots will thank you. My Philodendron Heartleaf stayed in the same spot for more than 5 years. It was thriving just a few feet away from an east-north facing window, trailing beautifully along the wall. So I didn't move the plant from its position, but I did rearrange my plant shelf. I placed bigger plants in front of it and I added even more on the windows, which ended up reducing the overall light in the room. The vines on the wall were probably still getting some light, but the pot and the base of the plant ended up sitting in very low light. And it was winter, the days were shorter, and honestly I didn't think much of it at that time. This plant is often labeled as low light tolerant, and while it can survive in lower light, that doesn't mean it thrives in it. Less light means weak growth, stretched out vines, and higher risk of long-term decline. If your plant is trailing toward the window or starting to look sparse, it's probably not getting enough light. So make sure your heartleaf is placed somewhere with bright indirect light, but avoiding harsh direct sun. Good light really makes all the difference. Another mistake I made was adding fertilizer without realizing the soil was too dry and very old. I thought I was helping, but in reality I was probably doing more harm than good. After that, I noticed the leaves dried even faster. Then I finally realized and checked the soil and started connecting all the mistakes I've made. When you apply fertilizer to dry soil, the salts in it can burn the roots. It becomes too concentrated, and instead of feeding your plant, it shocks it. And if the roots are already stressed from underwatering or poor soil, this only speeds up the damage. Philodendron Heartleaf doesn't need a lot of fertilizer, especially not during winter. I suggest using a liquid fertilizer diluted to half strength once every 2 months during the growing season. And always apply fertilizer on wet soil to avoid root damage. These plants are sensitive to chemicals because their roots are thin and gentle. I know that most plant lovers are afraid to prune their plants, or they simply feel sorry to do it, but some plants actually love this process. The last time I pruned this plant was 2 years ago when I made a video on how to propagate Philodendron Heartleaf. I'll leave a link in the description if you're interested to watch it later. I made few cuts on different vines, and very shortly after it started pushing out new growths. It became bushier, fuller, and the leaves got bigger. Pruning helps your plant stay healthy and lush. When you trim back long or damaged vines, it encourages the plant to branch out and grow new leaves. Remove any yellowing or dried leaves, cut back leggy stems, and don't be afraid to shape it up a bit. If your plant looks stretched out or the space between leaves is getting longer, that's a sign it's time to prune and give the plant more light. So don't be sorry, you can propagate the cuttings and grow new plants. When I look back at everything now, it wasn't just one mistake that caused my philodendron to decline. It was a combination of mistakes. I underwatered it, I left it in the same old soil for years. I blocked its light without realizing, I added fertilizer when the soil was dry and weak, and I didn't prune when I should have. Each of these mistakes on their own might not have been fatal, but together, and especially with me not reacting on time, they slowly pushed the plant into this state. And the truth is, I could have saved it earlier. I saw the signs, but I kept postponing action because I was busy and distracted by other things. So after all those mistakes, I knew I had to try and save it. So I repotted it into a slightly smaller pot with fresh, well-draining soil. I made some pretty drastic cuts, removed all the dried leaves and vines that were too far gone. There were around 6 healthy vines left, so I kept those, added a support and gently attached. I also gave it a full shower to refresh the leaves and clean off any dust. Now it's still recovering, but I truly believe it will be better. I hope this video helps you avoid the same mistakes I made. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to share them in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more plant care tips. Thanks for watching and happy growing!